Right, good afternoon, everybody. We'll make a start. Welcome along to the latest planning committee meeting. We'll start with apologies for absence, please.
Yes, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Ney. Councillor Rainsford will be substituting.
Thank you very much. Alison, welcome along. No stranger to the committee. I understand that Councillor McCarthy is on his way, so if we can record his presence, hopefully as he arrives, that would be great. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Is there anything at this stage anyone wants to raise? Anne.
Thank you, Chair. I believe I need to lodge a personal declaration of interest for the Grenville Hotel, item 6.1.
And what is the interest, though?
I am a friend of the objector.
Okay. I'm assuming you've had no dealings on this issue, though?
No.
That's great.
None.
Okay. As usual, if anything occurs to you that during the meeting that you're not aware of now, just wait till whoever's speaking is finished, catch my eye, and then we'll be able to add your interests on. Anything on the minutes from November 14th? No, then I'll sign those as a true record. Angela, if you could pass those over, I'd be grateful. Urgent business. I've just got 2 items to raise, 2 announcements. First is on the National Planning Policy Framework, and I'm advised and can advise the Planning Committee that a revised version of the National Planning Policy Framework was published at midday today. Annex 1 of the framework states that, and I quote, "The policies in this framework are material considerations which should be taken into account in dealing with applications from the day of its publication. Our officers have considered the changes to the framework and will highlight any specific changes to us in their presentations. Officers are not in a position yet to update on the specific changes to the Council's published 5-year housing land supply." And the second is on prior approval applications. 2 councillor referrals were received in relation to prior approval applications at 49 to 51 North Hill and 91 Houndescombe Road for conversions of the properties from offices to flats. A prior approval is an 8-week application. However, unlike with a planning application, if a decision is not issued within 56 days, the applicant will receive deemed consent and works can commence. Both the applications that were referred have now exceeded the 56-day decision period and have obtained deemed consent by default, meaning there's no decision for the committee to make. So as usual, we don't really have any debate on these items, but I'm sure if the issues contained arise, then I'm sure officers will be able to help as we go. Do we have any questions from members of the public on item 5? No, which takes us on to item 6, the planning applications. And the first is 6.1 at page 3. And we're at the Grenville Hotel, 82 to 84 Grenville Road. And Sam, over to you.
Thank you. The proposal before members today is the conversion of the Grenville Hotel's ground floor to 3 flats. The first floor was previously converted into 3 flats following planning permission being given in 2017. The proposal would see the pub lost and the whole building given over to housing. Officers previously refused a similar application earlier in the year under delegated authority, as it was considered that the applicant had not sufficiently justified the pub's loss. Further information was provided with this application in an attempt to do so. It should also be noted that a nomination has been put forward to include the pub on the Asset of Community Values Register, details of which are included in the addendum report provided. Members should also note, following the Chair's previous announcement regarding the updated MPPF, that the following paragraph numbers quoted in the report have now changed. These are on the screen now. So it's just highlighting where, so for example, in like paragraphs 8.2.1 and 8.2.7, the quoted paragraph 97 of the MPPF is now revised to paragraph 98, etc. That's and the next slide here just updates paragraph 25D, which is referenced in the report, as it's added the underlined for emphasis. And that is the Grenville Hotel there. No external alterations to the building are proposed, with the subdivision of the ground floor consisting of internal alterations. 3 one-bed flats would be provided, which all exceed the nationally described space standards, with sufficient outlook and access to light. Bike and bin storage would be provided for within the communal rear yard. The principle of whether the proposal is considered to be acceptable or not rests on Dev 18.6 of the Joint Local Plan, which reads, the change of use of facilities of local community importance, such as local convenience shops, post offices, public houses, cafes, restaurants, and community facilities, will only be supported where there is no significant harm to the level of service locally and where there is no reasonable prospect of the business or community use continuing. As such, members need to consider both facets of the policy. Some community uses, including pubs, are afforded some protection in the Joint Local Plan due to the above policy extract. For a pub to be lost, Dev 18.6 needs to be met. In response to the first point of Dev 18.6, the applicant provided details of a number of similar establishments which they considered were near to the site. They are included on the map shown on the screen, alongside a few others which officers added. The stick man in the centre represents the site, with the black dash line showcasing an indicative 10-minute walking catchment area. The red areas are the other pubs' similar catchment areas. The map shows that approximately 2/3 of the catchment is covered by the catchment of another pub, with around 1/3 towards the northeast not being. Whilst this shows that approving the scheme would leave some of the site's catchment without a pub within an indicative 10-minute walk, and there would be a level of harm to local service provision, officers are not of the view that this level of harm would be significant, as is set out in Dev 18.6, due to the other nearby establishments. In response to the second part of Dev 18.6, the applicant provided information including profit and loss accounts from 2019 to 23, which showed a loss being made in 3 of the 4 years, and marketing information from an estate agent showing that the property was on the market between July 2022 and February 2024, and that no formal offers were made on the property during that time, including at an auction. Statutory declarations have also been provided outlining the financial struggles. The pub ceased trading during the course of the last application and has not reopened. Based on this information provided, officers consider that the financial and marketing information is enough to satisfy the second part of Dev 18.6. Taking the previous points into account, officers are of the view that the case put forward by the applicant during the course of this second application satisfies both parts of Dev 18.6. Whilst the loss of the pub is regrettable and the public support for its retention is noted, policy-wise, officers are of the view that the loss has been sufficiently justified. The scheme is considered to accord with other JLP policies following no objections being raised by statutory consultees, including the Highway Authority. Officers also note JLP's policy aspirations to deliver new housing, and this scheme would provide 3 good-sized one-bed flats in a sustainable residential area. As such, officers' recommendation is that the planning committee grant the application with conditions included pertaining to the provision of bike and bin storage.
Sam, thank you very much indeed. Our first speaker on this item is Councillor Sudan, so if you'd like to make your way to the front, you're welcome to join us. Yep. You'll do fine, I'm sure. 5 minutes is yours. Would you like to be told when 4 have gone? Over to you.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the residents and the community of this part of Plymouth. I just want to talk first of all to the Dev 18.6 because I totally disagree with the officer's recommendation. When this first came to the planning application, it was deferred and it was refused and it was pushed back. I don't think the evidence has changed in any way, shape or form from when that original refusal was made. When you look at the map, 1/3 of the maps still have no community asset base. The residents and the locals put in a request to have an asset of community value nomination made on the property, and at that time it was refused, but there was no appeal. Having spoken to the legal officers in the council, a second application has now gone in, which is significantly different from the first. I think where I'm having problem is that it says, where there is no significant harm to the level of service locally, where there obviously is, that is the only local public house which is in the area, and where there is no reasonable prospect of the business or the community use continuing, and that is not true either. There is a viable offer on the table to purchase the property, and there are people who want to run the Grenville as it was intended as a public house. The offer has been on the table. It has not been acknowledged, and people have actually, the owners have actually said that it wasn't even made. It has now been made formally, and they have got a business plan that will make it work. It will be a different business model to the previous one, but that is not for this committee to decide whether a business model or the funding is valid or not. It is on the table. So when you go through onto page 7, so 8.2.4, and the next one, where it says, through the appropriate channels for advertising in terms of local, national and specialist agent publications and website relevant, the person who's put in the bid said that there wasn't even a notice put outside the Grenville to say that it was up for sale. I don't know how you actually prove or disprove this, but it was not widely marketed. So on 8.2.9, which is about the coverage in the area, it's funny, I was listening to Radio 4 as I was coming in today, and there was a whole thing about where public houses are closing 2 a day, and that where pubs have been taken over as assets of community value and run by locals and run by residents, they have become really, really successful. And if you look at all the things that we're doing about having inclusive spaces within communities where people can walk, where we're dealing with social isolation and we want warm spaces, this is the absolute perfect thing that if it was run and owned by the residents, they will be able to offer a community-based service within an area that has nothing else. I can look at other places in parts of St Jude's, like for instance Catdown Social Club, who are doing just that. They are becoming an integral part of the local community. So I think the mapping exercise about taking it away will have a significant impact, not just now, but in the future of where we can actually offer this community base. When it comes then to 8.2.10 and 8.211 and 8.12, all of this then is checking about the viability of whether the property was put on the market. I'm disputing that, and I'm saying that it wasn't widely advertised, and I'm also saying that there is now a viable funding option on the table to keep this as a public house. What worries me that if this goes through planning today, if it's not deferred, is that the planning application will go through before we get the response to the second asset of community value nomination. And I don't know how that works when you have 2 legal processes running within the City Council, but they don't talk to one another. I'm not sure, Chair, whether you can answer that, and I know that they are totally different, and that perhaps you're not allowed to take on board that we've put in the second nomination. So this is about, for me, as a local councillor and representing the residents, this is about the prospect of keeping a place within the ward which is used for residents, and my fear is that if you're planning granted, then that option is taken away. Thank you very much, Chair, for listening.
Sue, thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to make your way back up. Thank you. Our next speaker is Beatrice Belgrave-Jones. There we are. If you'd like to come and join us, you're welcome. 5 minutes will be yours too. Would you like to be told when only one is left?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
In your own time.
Sorry. Okay, so, hi, I'm Beatrice Belgrave-Jones and I live on Grenville Road. And I wanted to live in a community, and this was the first time in the 35 years that I've lived in this city that I felt part of a community. That Grenville was a space where St Jude's residents could connect with neighbours who would otherwise have been strangers behind closed doors, and we integrated a mainstream pub that was LGBTQ friendly, family friendly, and even dog friendly. It was diverse and inclusive, and it was frequented by young and old, and we celebrated milestones and raised money for charity, and we danced and we sang and we laughed, and sometimes we just sat and talked. But the officer's report treats the Grenville as a place purely to drink alcohol, replaceable by any other pub, and alcohol alone doesn't make a community facility or a valued asset. There are other places to drink alcohol within half a mile of the Grenville is no comfort to the people of St Jude's when these other places outside the area are so disparate that the community no longer meets, and the elderly and less mobile among us are unable to walk that further half mile, so they're now isolated and they have fewer social opportunities. And that strong community and social connection important to individual well-being, referenced by the MPPF, is no longer possible with this loss of the Grenville, and that's a significant harm caused by its closure. I feel that reasonable scrutiny of the applicant's supporting information makes clear that the loss of the pub was unnecessary and that it could have continued. An owner licensee without a rent liability to a landlord would see their costs reduced by £21,500, and they would not have to employ a bar manager, seeing a further saving of £9,500 minimum. And they would also not likely repeat the unexplained £1,851 donation in the licensee's accounts in 2023. And on that basis, the bottom line of those accounts would have increased by £33,000. So the pub is undeniably viable on that basis. And in addition, the rental income from the flats above the pub would have increased that figure to approximately £54,000. And this information in my objection was disregarded. And the officer's report advises that the online marketing of the pub for over 12 months with no offers received confirms no reasonable prospect of the business continuing. But this marketing information provided by the applicant confirms that in order to protect the going concern, there was no for sale board directed, and that's a direct quote. This was also disregarded. So even though the pub might have been marketed in ways typical to such properties, the average St Jude's resident isn't typically perusing commercial pages looking for pubs to buy. And the deliberate concealment of the intended sale from the residents of St Jude's prevented us from realising the pub was in need of the protection of asset of community value listing and from coming together to ensure it was retained. It also ensured that anyone in the community with the will and the means to buy the pub was unable to do so during the stated period of marketing. But in late May this year, Mr. Venner, a local resident, was informed by a member of the bar staff that the pub was for sale, and he phoned the owner on the 6th of June, offering to buy the pub for £400,000, which was £5,000 above the asking price at that time. So even though it was said to have been withdrawn for sale, it was still being marketed online, and I saw the advert. Mr. Venner showed this to me in our conversation. Such was his commitment that Mr. Venner was willing to sell his home to finance a sale, but he was advised by the applicant that unless he offered £500,000 rather, his time is being wasted. And in a Plymouth Live report on the 6th of June, the applicant made it clear that the property was still up for sale, that he was still open for offers.
1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Venner contacted or attempted to contact the owner again twice on the 21st. His calls were rejected. That was 21st of September, sorry. On the 22nd of September, he sent a text which was ignored. He emailed James Wells on, I believe, the 28th of September and was told only to contact the applicant via his details on the company's house website. On the 23rd of November, I joined with Mr. Venner and made a joint offer to buy the pub from Mr. Cottrell. I believe in that pub and the community so much, I'm prepared to put my own money in. We were told that the offer that we made was based on the lack of viability of the pub, when it was in fact based on the price that it was last advertised at. And we were told without proof of funds, even though we offered a letter from a mortgage advisor saying that they had found lenders willing to assist us in the purchase without proof of funds.
That's your time, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
But,
Our offer wouldn't be entertained.
okay. But
I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for hearing me.
For your comments and your time. And our final speaker on this item is James Wells. If you'd like to make your way down, you're welcome to be here too. Again, 5 minutes will be yours. Would you like to be told when only one is left?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I thought it might be helpful just to provide some slides, just to look at some of the facilities that include things that aren't pubs as well.
Mr. Wells, could you speak into the microphone a little bit?
Is that better?
Is that? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So much has been said about what is and what is not a local service in the area. And so far the focus is primarily on pubs. But as the map shows, you can probably see that, well, you can see where the Grenville is located. Around that site, you've got Top Hill Community Centre, Kerno's Cafe, the Elder Tree, and then a range of other public houses. So I don't think it's reasonable to say that this is the only space that's serving that area. It's quite clear that there's another range of facilities that people can use to gather in. Most of those are certainly comfortably within the 800-metre walking distance that Sam's referred to previously. In terms of trying to work out what is significant, there's no specific definition on that. So that's a question of judgment. I think it's also relevant to say that this policy covers 3 different planning authorities. So we're talking about a city location. The policy is also covering rural areas with very different levels of service. So I think in this case, there's definitely a judgment about what's available around the site. Then much has been said about viability. But what the supplementary planning document actually says is that all you have to do is to show that there's been 12 months of marketing. That's not been disputed by the planning officer. It's been advertised for sale through the appropriate channels with Vickery Holman for 18 months. That hasn't sold. It's been to auction and hasn't sold, and it's now closed. There's crossover between what's been said about the asset of community value and the planning application. 2 different processes. I'm sure you get legal advice on what that means. But in terms of this application, we've demonstrated what we need to demonstrate. That's not been queried. So as far as we can see, there isn't a viable business in planning terms, and that actually there isn't a level of harm because there are other services that people can use. So with that element cleared, you're then looking at the principle of providing houses in a location such as this, which is sustainable in itself. That's doing positive things, providing small dwellings. They're in demand, as we know. There's a housing crisis. Policy Dev 7 is quite clear about the need for small dwellings. So taken together with the lack of technical objections from consultees, we think that this is quite clearly in accordance with the development plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Wells? It's now open to the committee. Matt was first.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just get some clarification from officers about why, when this first came to our officers in July, it was judged that there weren't suitable alternative locations, and now in December it's judged that there are suitable alternative locations, because none have opened in the last 6 months that are suitable alternatives. So we'd just like some clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, so I suppose like with any policy judgment, like it's on the applicant to make a case. It's not really on officers to make their case for them or not. So in absence of the applicant providing us with that information, I suppose we kind of gave a cursory look at what was in the area, or and kind of came to that view, but based on the sort of lack of anything provided, with the applicant then kind of this time putting in kind of more effort in that sense and giving us a substantial list of alternatives, then that's allowed us to do our mapping exercise, which this one here, which has kind of allowed us to kind of properly consider that, rather than sort of arbitrarily ourselves looking on a map and picking a couple of nearby examples. So really, I mean, the previous refusal was kind of always worded in the sense that the loss wasn't justified, i.e. it was on the applicant to do that, not for us to make that justification. So I hope that answers your question.
And so how is this 10-minute walking time calculated from the Grenville pub? Because, I mean, if you were to just look on Google Maps, it would say there are no pubs within 10-minute walking distance of the Grenville. And certainly for any community to the east of the Grenville pub, there are definitely no pubs within a 15-minute walking distance according to Google Maps. So how's that calculated?
So generally in various policies within the JLP, there is no specific kind of walking route set out for pubs, but a number of kind of similar community uses have an 800-metre route, and in planning terms that generally is equated to a 10-minute walk. So that was fed into like our policy officers kind of put this together using the information provided by the applicant, and so that kind of fed into that. We used the 800 metres as a baseline based on the other policies, like I say, because there isn't a set one relating to pubs. So we applied that here to try and get a sense of what the provision is. I mean, I suppose all these things are like, there's an element of crudeness to all of these assessments, but we had to base it on something, and that's what we have. And the 800 metres was consistent, has been consistently set out in the SPD and in various policies, particularly SPT2, which has a number of different things set out relating to walking distances. So that was the way that we considered the best way to assess
Sam,
this.
I'm going to cut you off. What's going on with this? It's not. Could we put it on silent, please? If we could, thanks. I think everyone, including the officers. No, that's okay. If we could just do that, that'd be superb. Sam, thanks.
Sorry. I think I was basically at the end of what I was saying. Was that clear? Yeah, cool.
Okay for now. Okay, Alison was next.
Thank you, Chair. My query is about a process. One of the letters submissions came from the RSPCA trustees, and in it they, and I quote, "We're looking at the application form. The applicant had signed certificate A, brackets not B, and has therefore not served notices on the first floor tenants." I'm seeking clarification as to whether or not the applicant should or must have done that and done it correctly in order for this application to be not questioned at a later date, where there's a property with existing tenants.
Can someone answer the question, please?
So are you answering it?
I'll need to just check the application to see which box has been referred to. I'm not, Sam, unless you're familiar with which declaration. Okay, we'll need a couple of minutes just to check the application, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it clearly needs to be checked because if the process has not been carried out correctly, there's an issue.
Can we do that during further questioning? Is that okay? So we'll definitely come back to that one. Is that it? Is that it for now, Alison, on your points? Thanks. Maddie was next.
Thank you very much, Chair. The first thing I want to say is, well done, Beatrice. That was a really good speech. And also, Sudan spoke very passionately from the heart. I mean, the pubs are the heart of the community, and I'm gutted that this place is just reading through the report. I mean, you know, Beatrice very kindly put some meat on the bones and said about it being at the heart of the community, how so many people use it. After COVID, people were scared to go out to the pub again, but getting together is so vitally important for mental health and for other reasons. My question, Chair, is condition 2 says commencement within 3 years, but how long does an ACV actually take, please? Can someone answer that question for me?
Yes, if I can come back on the ACV process. So once an application is submitted to the registration authority, which is Plymouth City Council, there's an 8-week time frame for consideration of the application.
Thank you, Chair. Well, with that in mind, I don't know how many other speakers there are, but surely it'd be wise, perhaps, to actually defer this for 8, maybe 12 weeks until we can find out the outcome of the asset of community value. Would that be something, a proposal that you'd be willing to consider?
We can certainly come back to, I mean, certainly I'll take that as a valid proposition, but there might be other issues people want to raise in the meantime, but we'll definitely leave that there.
Absolutely. It's just I'm very aware. The thing is, the reason we were all, we all stood for council, the reason we're all here is because we all care about our residents and the community, and we have a councillor here who stood up passionately and fighting for her residents and fighting for her community. And that's something you know, we should be really, really proud of. So I think it's really important. Thank you, Chair.
We'll definitely come back to that one, I promise. Anne was next.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of points of clarifications, questions, and as Councillor Bridgman quite rightly brought up about the ACB. Now, I know we've had this addendum report left out for us today, which we also had emailed to us, saying about that is to be considered separately and does not form part of the planning application determination process. My question on that will be, what would happen if the ACV was granted? What would happen then to the planning decision if we'd made a decision on that today? So that's question number 1. Question number 2, going on to Dev 18.6, I don't actually feel that the application actually complies with that, if that is the right word to use. The last sentence of Dev 18.6 is where there was no reasonable prospect of the business or community use continuing. Now, I'm a bit of a paperwork nerd, and I brought with me, as I always do, my local joint plan supplementary planning document.
We all bring that with us, Anne. It's nothing special.
Yeah, well, you don't flash yours around, do you? So when I actually looked at Dev 18.6 in that, it's broken down into two paragraphs, one of which is actually covered in the report under 8.2.10. The other part of it says within the TTV policy area, within the same 12-month period, the owners of the business must show that they have highlighted the potential sale to the relevant parish councils, including adjoining parishes, to allow for the potential nomination of the property as an ACV. Now, that can be interpreted, in my opinion, in a number of ways. For example, did they highlight up to Plymouth City Council as being the parish council, that the pub was up for sale? They haven't put boarding up outside the front of the pub. So have they actually, to say for sale, so have they actually met the requirements of this part of the plan or not. So I'd be really pleased for some clarification on that. Thank you.
Thanks. 2 points there. If we could address Anne's questions, please.
Yeah, I'll do the second point if then Julie can do the first point. I'll do that. So the TTV, that stands for Thriving Towns and Villages, which is the part of so the JLP covers Plymouth, South Hams and West Devon. And within that, there's the Plymouth policy area and the Thriving Towns and Villages policy area. So the bit that you're referring to doesn't apply within Plymouth. That only applies within the area covered by that. So that would be South Hams and West Devon, essentially. So that... What do you mean? Sorry, it says the bit you quoted was referring to the TTV policy area. That's not for us to consider. Yeah, so we can't consider that as part of within the Plymouth policy area. So that's why that bit's not been referenced, and it wasn't. So therefore, the applicant wouldn't have needed to, because there's no parish council in here for them to refer to.
So in relation to the second point, just to give you some background on assets of community value, ACVs, and then how that coincides with the planning process. As we've heard, they are two separate processes. They have separate statutory rules and regulations to govern them. So assets of community value are governed by, they initially came in through the Localism Act, governed by their own regulations. They have their own process. The council deals with them not as the local planning authority, but as the registration authority. So those applications come into the council as a registration authority. The planning process is totally separate. With regards to assets of community value, they can be a material planning consideration, but only when they are actually registered as an ACV. So the fact that an application is in and being considered as an ACV is not a material planning consideration. It's when it's actually listed. The weight to be given to that material planning consideration, if an ACV, a building or a piece of land is registered, is done on a case-by-case basis. So then it is down to the case officers to determine how much weight they're going to give to that registering of that building as an ACV. In this particular situation, we don't have an asset of community value. We have an application for one, but we don't have one listed. So it is currently not a material planning consideration. And it is totally separate process. It has different criteria to consider. You have different criteria to consider from the planning application point of view.
And
Once,
what's the turnaround time for these?
8 weeks. So it's 8 weeks. I was just going to come on to explain what an ACV does and what it doesn't do.
Okay.
So what an asset of community value does is, yes, it affords a property some protection if the owner decides to sell it. What it doesn't really do is, as planning can do, is protect it from a use perspective. So as long as if an owner has a building and it is registered as an ACV, but they want to change the use, so for instance, it's a pub, they retain ownership of it, but they still want to convert it to flats, they could do so. And we have had examples of that happen in the city. The Friendship Inn, Amity Place at North Hill was one of the first in Plymouth. And that was a pub, and as I say now, it is flats. So if it remains in the ownership of that person, the freehold owner, then if they decide that they want to submit an application and apply to change the use, they could still do so. What the ACV process does do is, if that person decides to sell it, then there's moratorium periods, there's periods where if there is a local community group and they are interested in buying it, they have the opportunity to do so. What the ACV process doesn't do for the owner is force them to sell it to that community group. They can consider the offer, but it doesn't actually, it's not mandatory that they run with that offer.
So if the asset status is in place, although that doesn't on its own prevent a change like the one we've been asked to consider, it does become a material consideration.
Yes, once a building is registered as an ACV, Plymouth City Council decided back in 2013, 2014, there was a cabinet decision that we would, because it's totally down to individual local planning authorities whether it will be a material consideration. Plymouth City Council decided it would be a material consideration, but obviously it depends on how much weight is given to it.
So there's a potential that if the asset status had been in place today, that the recommendation may be different on that basis alone.
I couldn't comment on what it may or may not have done to the decision, because obviously that would have been for the case.
No, I'm not asking if you to say what the recommendation would be, but it is something that Sam would have had to take
Yes.
into account, and it could possibly have altered the recommendation.
It would have been something that the plan case officer would have had to consider as a material planning consideration, and he would have had to decide how much weight he was going to put.
Thanks. The other point that Anne raised, I think we've gone through the parish council issue. I think, Anne, you were asking about the advertising of the sale generally.
Yeah, and I also asked about what would happen if hypothetically, if planning permission was granted and then the ACV was also approved, what would happen in that situation? That was also one of the things I asked.
So if planning permission is granted, and then in 8 weeks' time it is registered as an asset of community value, then obviously it's down to the owner to decide how he's going to proceed. I mean, an owner does have an option to have a decision reviewed. So if it was listed, the owner could come back to us as the registering authority, not as the local planning authority, but the owner could come back to the registration authority and ask for a review. And we'd have to then go through a review process if they requested that.
But they could also ignore it.
They could also ignore it, yes.
And the question about the knowledge of the sale? Wider than the, I think Anne specifically mentioned parish councils, which we've dealt with, I think. But there was the wider issue of how well known in the public sphere, and I'm paraphrasing now, was the sale advertised both with a large A and a small a?
I mean, in relation to how somebody goes about advertising their property for sale is totally down to the individual as to whether they are going to want to have a board outside. I mean, you know, this is across the board for any sale, whether it's a pub or your own house. It's down to you to decide how you want to publicise that and how much publicity you want to give it, whether you want to have a board outside, whether you don't have a board outside. Legally, there's nothing. That is down to the owner to decide how they are going to publicise their sale.
So that doesn't have any bearing on the decision for us today? Okay, thanks. Jeremy's been waiting patiently there.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm interested in the officer's response to Councillor Smith's question earlier. It seems to me from reading the JRP JAVS 18.6 that the onus is on the council to judge whether there is a reasonable prospect of a business or community continuing, and if there's significant harm. I mean, that the spirit of DEV 18.6 seems to be around continuation of public services, and that's, you know, where possible we should have a continuation of public services unless those services are defunct. So you spoke about the evidence in the updated application around the commercial viability and the effectively the continual availability of this asset presented by the applicant, who of course is biased because he's made an application to convert the property into 3 flats. First of all, I was wondering what independent analysis that we had done the council has done around the Dev 18.6. Have we judged that there is no reasonable prospect of the business or community use continuing, and whether there's significant harm? Because we've heard today that it seems that there is a reasonable prospect of the business or community use continuing in different hands. And I would also ask Mrs. Parkin, I would suggest that it is material to Dev 18.6 how this property has been marketed, because if you effectively don't market this property and for sale and offer it as a viable business under a different business model, under a different owner, and you effectively don't market that effectively, then what you're doing is you're not ensuring that there is a reasonable prospect that the business or community use will continue, because you have effectively biased the change of use towards the applicant, because we only have the applicant's views on how information on how this was marketed. So my question really is, have we undertaken an independent analysis of how this business is marketed, whether we believe as a upholder of the JLP, whether that business has been marketed effectively to ensure in our own minds that there is no reasonable prospect that that business community could continue? So what an independent analysis have we done on that aspect?
I mean, I'll let Julie comment on the part about the conveyancing, I suppose, but your point about independent analysis. So, I mean, I suppose like with any application, we have to assess what's put in front of us, and this, the financial information that we were given was discussed with with a colleague who deals with viability, and has in previous roles at previous authorities dealt with similar types of schemes, and in his opinion that the kind of numbers that were put forward were pretty typical to seen when pubs are not successful. So there were no sort of red flags raised in that sense. I suppose, we've not had put forward to us it's difficult to comment on what may be possible, I suppose. Like, ultimately, people can have an opinion on how they would run something or how something could work, but I think we can only go on sort of concrete information that's presented to us, and we came to the view based on the information that was given to us that the policy has been met. Obviously, that it's an on-balance call. There is, for example, like this mapping here shows, that there is an argument to be made that there is a level of harm. It's whether members consider that to be significant or not. But as far as kind of financial information goes, like, say that has been looked at by someone who does that, who has done that in their job previously and who has done that for the council. And the numbers, like I say, were not considered to be out of the ordinary. It didn't seem to be a cynical application being made, or a particularly money-spinning scheme being made in this instance. So, like I say, we can only comment on what's there. I mean, I don't know if you want to expand on that or.
Yeah, I think just to echo, I think the supplementary planning document is quite clear about what we can and can't take into account, and it is limited to the length of time and the means by which it's been advertised, and obviously the impact on the community locally. And I know that we have consulted with economic development colleagues on the application, and we have obviously produced our own evidence to support what that provision is locally. I think that's as far as we can go in that assessment as a local planning authority.
But as a committee, we could take a different view if members chose. Alison And hopefully, as you're preparing to ask your question, Stuart can answer your previous one.
Yeah, so I've had a look. The application is accompanied by Certificate A, which indicates that they're the sole owner of the property. So we then refer to Section 65 of the Town and Country Planning Act, which kind of sets out what that means in terms of ownership. So I will just... But effectively, it's the freehold owner or any tenants with 7 years remaining on their tenancy agreement, or any agricultural tenants considered within the owner. So the local planning authority wouldn't ordinarily assess the validity of the certificate that's been put forward, but it is, if we are aware of any inaccuracies with that certificate, then we must obviously consider that before making a decision. So I'm not aware of what the tenancy arrangements are in that property.
They're probably assured short hold type tenancies, aren't they, which would not be going to be 7 years long. They're likely to be quite short.
Alison.
I was just curious because the point Stuart was making was it was the freeholder or tenants who had 7 years left. Well, there are very few tenants who have tenancies that are of that length. So I think there are some questions potentially.
So, I mean, the serving of the certificate, so obviously the applicant chooses which certificate to serve in accordance with the specification in the Act. So if there are no tenancies with more than 7 years left on them, then the applicant is most likely correct in submitting Certificate A.
And there's nowhere we can check either, is there? Or is this...
How would that work?
If we had good reason to question the validity of the certificate, then I think we would need to check that.
Is that something we could... Were we minded to agree the application? Is it something we could defer to you as officers, obviously presumably to Paul Barnard as the service director, say that we were minded to approve pending, and I'm talking off the cuff now, but pending checking of the relevant certificates. So if they did check out, the planning permission would flow. If they didn't, then that would be a reason for refusal.
Sorry. I mean, the consequences of the wrong certificate being submitted are significant, as in the decision could be quashed in the courts. However, we would need evidence to obviously go above and beyond what our normal process would be, which is to rely on the applicant to submit the correct certificate. So we would need evidence to pursue further investigation.
I get the evidence would be needed. What I'm saying is, rather, we've got an option perhaps to defer for that, which does seem a little bit extreme on that, but just for that reason alone. But what I'm sensing is that the best way would be if we get to the end of the debate and the committee is minded to approve the application, but we've still got this certificate issue that Alison raises outstanding, that's something that can be checked by officers. That's a technical issue. Either the correct certificate has been submitted or it hasn't. That's not a matter of judgment, that's a matter of fact. So we could then leave it to officers to work out that and then to publish the decision notice in whatever way that took us. But that's we're a little bit way off there. Did you have another question that was... Go on, yeah, off you go.
It's completely different. And I wonder whether, Sam, we could have the ground floor plan up, because trying to read it on this, even enlarging it, I can't actually see it. I'm concerned about the small... It's the middle one, the ground floor. You see where all those bins are? That's the only window to that ground floor room, which I think is the bedroom. Personally, I think that's really rather too close and could be extremely unpleasant in hot weather for the people who live there. I don't know whether that's a concern we should have, but I just think it's not a particularly pleasant layout for people buying that flat, potentially.
Well, if we end up in a refusal situation, then we'll go through all the reasons that people have raised from a negative point of view and just see which are material, which are not material, and which are likely to be useful. I've got a number of people, all of whom will have a chance to speak. The next one is Anne.
Me again, sorry. Okay, so I want to go back to the advertising. So do you take the applicant's word on what they say they've done about advertising, or do you ask them to provide evidence of advertising they have done? That's the first bit. Second one is, following on from what Councillor Rainsford was saying, you said about Stuart, you said about you rely on the applicant to send the right certificate in. Do we not undertake any checks on that? I mean, it's a legal document. Should we not be checking it? If not, why not? And then thirdly, just on the plans up there, what about the outside space? I thought with change of use and converting properties into flat, they had to have a minimum amount of outside space. Thank you.
So in terms of the advertising, the applicant, well, it was the agent, which Vickery Holman, who did the marketing, that provided us with a breakdown of that process, basically saying how it was marketed, when it went to auction, how it was advertised, which price it was for various different periods. So there's kind of no reason for us to doubt sort of the accuracy of that information. I'll leave Julie or Stuart to talk about the certificates, but your third, sorry, can you just remind me what your third question was?
Yeah, sorry, I did sneak three in there.
That's all right.
Outside space.
Oh yes, outside space.
Thank you.
Yes, so so the JLP and Dev 10 does set out kind of aspirations for outdoor space. I suppose when we're looking at conversions, we have to be realistic as to what is achievable, and so for example, a lot of flats, especially in older parts of the city, more densely populated areas, or sort of terrace properties in these, these parts of the city don't kind of come with outdoor space. Obviously, that is regrettable, and it's something that kind of we always consider. However, in this instance, like Tot Hill Park is quite close by, so there is outdoor amenity space available locally. We didn't think that would be a significant enough reason for refusal, given that flats, especially in, like I say, older buildings, older conversions, it's quite a common situation to see.
Yeah, in terms of obviously the documents that the applicants submit, then it's entirely up to them to identify that the land is within their ownership. The council wouldn't do that check. I mean, the risk is to the applicant, of course. So if an applicant provides false information and that is challenged in the courts, that the applicant's permission, so the benefit to the applicant is what would be lost effectively. So it isn't common practice, not in Plymouth or any other authority as far as I'm aware, of checking the validity of certificates, only unless, unless obviously something is pointed out to the local plan authority that there is an error in that certificate, and in such a circumstance we would need to investigate it before we issued a decision, but we would have to be acting on evidence.
Thanks, Stuart. I've got 5 people who I've indicated I'll call to speak. I will call all of those, and then I think we're going to have to look to reach conclusion. I'm not sensing much disagreement among the committee, so I don't want to. I'm sensing we're heading towards some form of refusal. I don't want to prejudge anything, but that's where I sense we are. So I don't want to prolong things unnecessarily if we're going to get another comment for refusal, another comment for refusal. That's where, if we were getting one comment for approval, and then we might be in a different situation. But the next person is Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I think this application, more than any other I've seen ever since I've been on planning committee, really does sort of highlight what's sometimes a disparity between, you know, real life and community and people and the actual letter of the planning regulations. You know, this is all about, you know, planning, the built environment. It just affects people's lives, people's everyday experience in the city so much. And it's, you know, something like an asset of community value. Bee's speech was so moving, and it's so difficult to measure and quantify the value of a facility like this that is so much more than just a local pub. Beatrice explained it far, far better than I could ever imagine. But ultimately, it just comes down to planning regs, what grounds there are for refusal or not, and the joint local plan. And I'm so glad we've got the joint local plan, which does then put that a sort of an extra layer with a little bit of humanity in. I mean, that's enough pontificating, really. What I was going to ask about the application for an asset of community value, sorry to hark back to this, but I think it's worth asking. How often are they ever actually refused? And what sort of grounds would there be for refusal? Because while it's not the be-all and end-all or a magic bullet that would conclusively decide this application once and for all, I get that, it would just affect the recommendations or partially affect them. I still think it's worth asking the question, do they ever fail, and what sort of grounds do they fail on?
If you could just bear with me, I can get the criteria. And yes, they do get refused. So we have on the council's website, as the registration authority, they have to have a list of all the ACVs, applications that are received, all the applications that are successful, and all the ones that aren't successful. So if you have a look on there, there are quite a few that have been unsuccessful, and they stay on the register for 5 years. So yeah, if you go on our website, you will see that, you know, there are ACVs that we've had over the last few years that haven't met the criteria. And what you've got to bear in mind, obviously, it's totally different criteria to the planning process. But just bear with me. I've got the guidance here, and I will just locate. Sorry. So under the ACV regulations and under the Localism Act, as I say, there's certain criteria that need to be met. So I'll just read you. This is from a non-statutory guidance booklet that came out a little while ago, but it still sets out what those are. So if a local authority receives a valid nomination, it must determine whether the land or building nominated meets the definition of an asset of community value as set out in section 88 of the Act. A building or other land in a local authority's area is land of community value if, in the opinion of the authority, an actual current use of the building or other land that is not an ancillary use furthers the social well-being or social interests of the local community, and it is realistic to think that there can continue to be non-ancillary use of the building or other land which will further, whether or not in the same way, the social well-being or social interests of the local community. So when we look at those criteria, and what I should say is we deal with these ACVs in legal services, as has been mentioned. What we tend to do when we have a situation like this. There's a couple of lawyers, myself included, and we'll split it. So one of us will act on behalf of the Registration Authority and one of us will act on behalf of the Local Planning Authority. And in this instance, I'm acting on behalf of the Local Planning Authority and my colleague is dealing with the ACV application on behalf of the Registration Authority. So what happens at the end of that 8-week process, evidence will be obviously submitted by the applicant. We also do a limited gathering of information ourselves, look at the regulations and obviously the criteria set out, look at other case law, and I have to say, since this has come in, the bulk of the case law is on public houses, which is probably no surprise in the environment we're in. And after that period of time, a report will be prepared and a formal briefing note of the decision of the Registration Authority, and that will contain how we've assessed those two elements. And that was done on the previous ACV for this one, and it will be done again on this particular application that is currently with us.
Yeah, thank you, that's helpful.
That I totally agree. I've got Matt, Josh, Kathy, Kevin, and then we'll look to hopefully reach some form of conclusion. So Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think what I was going to ask has kind of already been asked in the last few questions, but just coming back to this point about whether the actual marketing of the property should be thought of as a material planning consideration. You know, the applicant is required to have, by planning rules, to have marketed the property and proved that, you know, it couldn't necessarily be sold or be viable as a community space or as a pub still. But we've heard today that he's had an offer of £5,000 over the asking price. So if he's not going to accept an offer over the asking price, is he just, you know, marketing this property in name only? Is he just putting it out there to meet these planning rules and actually not interested in selling it at all? So I think, you know, we're clearly drawing to an end on this, but I think it's pretty obvious that there are two grounds to refuse this on, and that's that there's no proof that this couldn't be a viable community space. There's a community who want their pub back and have got the money to do it. So we should let them do that, and the owner should let them do that. And I think also there's been no proof that there isn't an unacceptable loss of community space, because I think, you know, those pubs that have been identified within that slightly arbitrary 800 metre, they're within 800 metres, but you know, one of them's off Ebrington Street. It's a long way away from where the pub is now. One of them's in the other end of Catdown, near Sutton Harbour, and the other one is in Brettonside, right by the barcode. Any argument that those places are suitable alternatives for a community pub that is actually a very separate community. It's surrounded by lots of main roads. Any suggestion that those are suitable alternatives, I think, is clearly nonsense, to be honest. So yeah, I hope that we'll refuse this application today, and I hope the owner gives the community their pub back.
Just on your point there, Matt, about the geography. It strikes me we're about to, on a completely separate subject, we're about to go into a boundary exercise on our electoral wards. And if we were to draw boundaries on that sort of basis, I'm sure the Boundary Commission would laugh at us in terms of the little stick figure looking to where his or her polling station should be. The detail we've got there crosses so many natural boundaries, as you say, main roads, that there doesn't seem to be any spirit of community to what's proposed there, and that's what's going through my mind on that basis. Josh.
Thanks, Chair. Really interesting debate today. Listening to the community, you know, really powerful community voice. I think for me, I sort of come at this from a sort of optics angle. I share the concerns Councillor Goslin's raised. I think they're very valid about sort of, you know, independent assessment. I think the optics of hearing such a strong community voice, you know, with this ACV in process, an 8-week period, concerns me greatly. I think, you know, the piece around marketing, I guess, optics-wise, you could spin that both ways, can't you? You know, at the end of the day, it's been on the open market, it's been online. So, box ticked. But I guess what we're hearing from the community and the way this is being presented to us is that this is being done in some sort of underhand way. That's how those optics are being presented today. And for me, that's a concern. We've heard such a strong community voice. We've heard of an offer. I feel that if we kind of rush, and I should also note, actually, sorry, that I appreciate that these processes are independent of each other. But I guess, again, there's probably, a challenge around optics and a risk and concern to the local authority that if the left hand doesn't seem to know what the right hand's doing, that could leave us, with a lot of egg on our face. And I think that's, it's a valid concern. We've also heard a lot around on-balance calls. And for me, this is very much an on-balance call for us as well. And I am very much feeling that, I can't recommend this to go forward at this stage. And I think there would be, a sensible optics, coming back to that, on waiting and allowing the community to have their opportunity to see this ACV process through. And I think, with that, I guess I would wonder, Judy's spoken to us around, separating out the legal process with ACV, and that a colleague is dealing with the other side of that coin. Should we be hearing from that other colleague with reference ACV?
Chair, through you, no. The planning committee is not the decider of ACVs. As I say, it's a totally separate process. So there's a process in place, and it keeps it apart from the planning process, which is as it should be. And we really shouldn't be sort of muddying those waters by having a debate here about the actual ACV process, because that's not where the authority to deal with ACVs lies. The planning committee do not have the authority to consider ACVs, so that needs to be dealt with separately by the council as the registration authority.
I think my point, Chair, is that I appreciate their separate processes, but if that is being undertaken at this point in time, and we look at them separately,
No, it's not our job to look at them at all. Our job is to consider the planning application, and that's as far as the Grenville pub goes, that's where our job ends. If another arm of Plymouth City Council is looking at assets of community value status, they need to be, in the same way we can't look at housing or housing policy, we can't decide whether potholes get repaired, we can't decide what bins get emptied. We have a job to do that's laid down by our constitution. So I think I've been very lenient in letting the subject be aired, but I think if we were to take any decision based on an asset of community value status that doesn't exist at the moment and may not exist in 8 weeks' time, and I'm not prejudging it, may or may not, I think we would be in very, very hot legal water.
Okay.
There are, inevitably, as with any planning application, there are going to be planning reasons to support the change of use of the ground floor and planning reasons to oppose the change of use of the ground floor. And I would strongly urge people to keep those, and there might be some disagreement, with the officers even, but that's, once we start getting outside of those, we're in trouble, because that just screams appeal to me, and costs awarded against us to me as well. So if we could, but we'll tie everything up, because like everybody else, I sense where we're going, but Kathy has been waiting as well.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of points that I'd like clarification on, please. First of all, I understand this pub has been closed for a few months. Is that correct? And what difference does that make to its viability? To what extent is that taken into consideration in its viability?
So yeah, the pub closed during the process of the last application. I think it was either May or June this year. That in and of itself, we haven't considered that as a reason to allow its closure. Ultimately, we've looked at the information provided to us separately, the fact that it isn't open at the moment, we haven't specifically considered that, and that is in the report somewhere.
Second point is, the original application is subject to an appeal. Now, I don't know how long appeals take, but if we were to defer or refuse, then presumably the appeal could, if the appeal was allowed, then that would take precedence.
Yeah, it's a totally separate application, so if the appeal is allowed on the previous application, then they will have consent. Obviously, if it's refused, then they would be deferring to this application.
And the third point is a detail about the cycle provision. And I gather you've got 3 cycle spaces, but there's possibility of having 6 people living there. And there's also flats above. So is the cycle provision going to be adequate for everybody that would be living in the property?
So we can only consider the application that's in front of us. So whatever was agreed, we can't kind of add the previous we can only kind of condition the cycle storage for this scheme. So therefore, that's the 3 flats that we're considering. The policy requirements for such, or set out in Dev 29, is kind of like one per bed, basically. So the Highway Authority in this instance would be seeking cycle storage for 3 bikes. So that's kind of consistent with our general requirements.
Kevin, and then we'll see where we are in terms of decisions. So Kevin, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll keep it swift. I just wanted to kind of look at Dev 18.6 and kind of reiterate some of the points that Councillor McCarthy made about the box ticking. Councillor Smith mentioned it, and Councillor Freeman in regards to the advertising. I know it's been talked about a fair bit, so I won't go on too much. But essentially, when I see the word community, I think of the older members, younger members, those with learning difficulties, disabilities. All of these are part of community. Now, the only advertising I've seen has been online. Are we digitally excluding a lot of people within this community? Because that, for me, means that we're not getting a true representation of the community, nor are we giving them the opportunity to actually raise concerns. And my question is kind of twofold, and I respect what you said earlier, Chair, about, we could have a look at what's presented. But for myself, I would really like us as a council to actually note about how advertising is done and how we are making sure that these visual aids are available for everyone in the community rather than just those who are only digitally minded. And I just wanted to ask and just literally clarify, was all the advertising regarding this sale purely online, or was there something I've missed?
So, as far as we've been kind of informed, advertising was done online. I mean, that's I suppose that's up to the estate agent as to how they advertise that, and up to the applicant. I suppose that's all we can really say on that.
Well then, in Dev 18.6, where we're talking about reasonable prospect of the business or community use continuing, I don't think that's a fair enough grounds that we've covered community if we're going to be excluding potentially so many. And I think that's a consideration that we should make.
That will certainly form part of our reasoning. I'm sensing that people aren't universally happy in voting this one through. So Matt, with permission, I'll come to you. I think you've come closest so far to outlining specific planning reasons for refusal. So if I can start with you, if people will agree to that, and then we'll see if we can sort of formulate. Obviously, we haven't taken a vote on the application yet, but if we do end up refusing, then we'll need to have proper reasons. So I'll come to Matt first.
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty much what I just said. I think there's clear grounds for refusing this on the basis that not all opportunities have been explored for it being a viable business, so there's no reasonable grounds to assume it couldn't be a viable business. And I don't think there's any evidence that there's suitable alternative provision for community space within the area. So those 2 points are pretty clear.
That's helpful. Stuart, can I ask you to sort of comment on what you've heard from Councillor Smith there, and are there any sort of, if we did go down those lines, where would we end up policy-wise in terms of decision notices and so forth?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think we're in an unusual day today, given that the National Planning Policy Framework has been published at 12 o'clock. We are duty-bound to give it full consideration and full weight. We know that the purpose behind the revisions to the National Planning Policy Framework are to strengthen and accelerate the delivery of housing. We've acknowledged at the beginning of the in the officer's presentation that we haven't as yet done the calculation to understand what those changes mean for the 5-year housing land supply for Plymouth. So if members were minded to refuse this application, my advice would be that we move to defer the application until such time that officers can calculate the 5-year supply and make sure that members are fully aware of the weight that should be attributed in policy terms to the delivery of housing. I think without doing so, we do run the risk of being challenged on that at appeal, because obviously we are making a decision today on the basis of the MPPF as of today, but I am just not in a position today to give you our position in terms of the 5-year supply and therefore what the policy implications of that are. I hope that makes sense.
Could we, if we were to defer, could that be minded to refuse?
I think, yeah, it could be defer subject to obviously what I've just set out in relation to the affordable housing only. So I think you've made your position on Dev 18 quite clear, that you're not convinced that it meets that criteria, and that's, you know, that is a judgment call in terms of have they satisfied the criteria, and I think the debate has been well had there. So I think it would be giving us the ability to come back to you to just make clear what weight should be attributed to the delivery of housing, so that you're fully aware of that when you make your decision.
Matt, and then Anne. Matt.
So if we were to defer today on that basis, when it eventually comes back to us once we've got clarification on those points, would that be the only basis for discussion in that meeting? So this meeting would essentially be accepting that we're not satisfied it meets Dev 18, and we'll purely be coming back together to make sure that there are no conflicts with the changes in the national framework in the future.
Yeah, we do sometimes defer for sort of what you might call open reasons, because we genuinely don't have a piece of information that might lead us in either direction. Here, I would strongly recommend that we do a minded to refuse, as in that's where we are, assuming that's the view of the committee, and it would need something really big to come back and change that. That would be my strong suggestion. And Anne wants to come in.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Last one from me, I promise.
We are being webcast, so that promise is online.
I have my fingers crossed. I'd also like to put into the mix about Dev 10. Okay, the lack of outdoor amenity space, the tiny little bit of outdoor space that there is, where the bin storage is, under Dev 10 4.139 in a supplementary pack, it does also say about outdoor space, whatever there is, has to be accessible to all residents. So to all flats within the property as well. And unfortunately, because the plan is quite small, it's not easy to see if all those flats are going to have access to that small outdoor space. And each space is supposed to have, including conversions of existing properties into flats, 50 metres square per development, plus 5 metres square per additional unit over 5. This will normally be in the form of a communal space. So I think perhaps we can take that into a little bit more consideration as well.
You spoke about earlier about, well, I think we touched on this subject. You spoke about the commonality of amenity space in the area, given the sort of nature of housing and the age of the housing, etc. So if we were to refuse including the reasons Anne set out as part of the refusal reasons, what would your advice be there?
We'd have to have a look at what the standards are. I mean, obviously, in many respects, we look at what the standard is. We then, if there is a deficit to that standard, we obviously look at what's in the locality and make a judgment call as to whether that's sufficient for the occupiers. I mean, I haven't seen whether we've got a particularly strong case in that, but we need to have a look.
My worry is that, and I've seen this happen so often, the committee ends up getting carried away with reason after reason after reason. It's better to have one or two, what you might call killer reasons, that we are and I think Matt's outlined those, that we are absolutely confident of, rather than looking around for 10 or 20 ones which might be difficult to defend and appeal and end up costing us money. So my advice would be to go down the reasons that Matt, could we just outline what they would look like in terms of policy reasons then, if we went down the two that Councillor Matt Smith has suggested?
So I think it would be, if we're deferring but minded to refuse on the grounds of non-compliance with Dev 18 in terms of the loss of the community facility, and non-compliance with Dev 10 in relation to the provision of outdoor amenity space.
Is it okay if we put that in your name then, Matt, as a recommendation, which I'm happy to second, which would be we are minded to refuse based on those reasons, and that you will report back on the wider NPPF calculations next time. Julie, before we come to a decision,
yeah, just going to say, following on from that in the final decision, so you've got your minded to refuse because contrary to Dev 18, Dev 10, and then you're deferring further consideration on the NPPF and the 5-year housing land supply.
Does everybody understand that as the proposal? It's been moved and seconded. So if we could move to the vote on that one formally, please. So this is on the proposal that Matt's made, not the officer recommendation. So if you agree with Matt, you vote for. I will take that as agreed. Thank you very much, everybody. That was not the shortest debate in the world, but I think a very worthwhile one. So thank you for that. Should we take 2 or 3 minutes just to catch our breath? I think Anne's keen. So if we come back, say at 35 minutes past. Will that do everyone? Okay, we'll adjourn until then. Thanks very much. Now at item 6.2, page 15, we're at 24 Queenan Terrace, and over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to firstly make members aware that the incorrect addendum report was uploaded publicly yesterday. I believe the correct iteration of the addendum report has been provided to members this afternoon. Please also accept the following verbal update to confirm the changes which have been made to the decision notice. Updated elevations have been submitted showing the proposed gate on the north elevation in situ. The proposal itself remains unchanged. Accordingly, the wording of Condition 1 has been updated to reflect this. In addition, please regard the paragraph of the original addendum report in relation to Section 2 of the Officer Report. This is not relevant to this proposal. The published addendum report does not refer to the addition of a further informative to the decision notice. I would like to make members aware that, as referenced within paragraph 8.38 of the report, Informative 4 relating to the resident parking scheme has been added to the decision notice. Members are also advised that a revised version of the National Planning Policy Framework was published today, which supersedes the NPPF 2023. Please also note that specific references within the Officer's report are updated as indicated on this slide. The Case Officer's recommendation is unchanged and remains conditional approval. This application is being considered by the Planning Committee as a result of member referral by Councillor Ricketts. This item relates to 24 Queenan Terrace, which is located in the Drake ward of the city, and you can see the location indicated here on the map. The application site is a 3-storey property with rooms in the roof space located on the corner of Queenan Terrace and Marlborough Road. Currently, the property has been subdivided into flats on the upper floors, with the ground floor currently a vacant office space. This application relates to the ground floor of the property. The application is for the change of use of this ground floor office from Class E to two self-contained flats, Class C3. And here's just the site again. And this is the view of the property from North Hill, and the view of the property from the rear from Addison Road. This is the existing ground floor plan of the office. Concerns were raised in relation to the loss of the office space. Policy Dev 14 seeks to maintain a flexible mix of employment sites and outlines the provisions for allowing a change of use of an existing employment site. Evidence, including marketing material, has been submitted alongside the application in light of this, which has been considered by officers and the Council's Economic Development team. It is considered that the evidence submitted indicates there is no reasonable prospect of the site's future employment use in compliance with Dev 14.1. This is the first iteration of floor plans that were considered by officers. Officers raised concerns primarily with regard to occupant amenity. The internal arrangement of Flat A indicated that it did not comply with the nationally described space standards. Furthermore, concerns were highlighted from the designing out crime officer that access to Flat B would be via a rear service lane, an area of reduced natural surveillance with the potential to give rise to a fear of crime. The Council's residential waste team also requested that on-site bin storage was provided instead of relying on communal bins located within the rear service lane. Following negotiations, amended plans were submitted to the local planning authority. The amendments comprised of internal alterations to Flat A to meet the nationally described space standards, the installation of a side gate so that Flat B was accessed from Marlborough Road instead of the rear service lane, and the inclusion of designated on-site bin storage. Officers have assessed the amended plans and are satisfied that both flats will provide adequate amenity for future occupants and demonstrate an acceptable arrangement for bin storage. The bin storage has also been secured via condition. To ensure adequate levels of occupant amenity are maintained, officers have recommended a condition that only rooms labelled as bedrooms on the approved plans can be used as such without further consent from the local planning authority. The proposed development also includes the provision of one off-street car parking space. The local highway authority raised no concerns with the proposal, considering the site is located in a highly sustainable location with parking controls in place, permits for which the occupants of the flats would not be eligible for. The proposal includes the provision of cycle storage, which has been secured via condition. Here are the existing elevations. So the west elevation is the front elevation of the property and the east elevation is the rear. And then the north is the side elevation, viewing it from Marlborough Road. And then these are the proposed elevations of the site. So again, the front and rear elevations and the side elevation there. The elevations demonstrate the external alterations that are proposed as part of the proposal. These include the installation of a timber fence, a gate opening in the side boundary wall, and window and door alterations. Officers have assessed the visual impact and amenity impact of these works and raised no concerns. In conclusion, officers have considered this proposal against all relevant policies within the joint local plan and have recommended the proposal for conditional approval. Thank you, Chair.
Emily, thanks. Our first speaker on this item is Councillor Steve Ricketts. No stranger to the committee. You have 2 minutes if you'd like. You did spot that, didn't you? 5 minutes is yours. We'd like to be told when one is remaining.
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. I'm back talking about planning applications in the North Hill area, obviously because I'm the local representative for North Hill and I am passionate about the area, particularly in North Hill, because I want it to be a destination of choice. I want it to have things that people want to come and do and see and not just be flats, okay? Because every single time applications are coming in over the years, over the weeks, of just conversions to flats, okay? And North Hill can be so much more than just flats, okay? We need to support the economy. We need to have wider offers. And these applications keep coming in. It's going to change the whole character of North Hill. And it's one after the other. And I'll fight tooth and nail every inch on every one to say that I did my very best when I'm walking it or driving through it. So I did my best to make North Hill an area where there's more than flats. It's a choice you have today, and there's different policies on this to protect North Hill, to keep this as an employment space. Okay, it's there at the moment. It is protected. Okay, it's protected under Dev 4 in the joint local plan. This officer report is arguing that there's no reasonable prospect of the site being used for employment use. I would say that isn't the case, that this is a great site. This is a great opportunity for somebody to make this a business and to make North Hill a diverse location. You have a choice for this to be under Dev 14 to continue as an employment commercial space or to turn it into 2 flats, where there's already hundreds of them, okay? I argue that under the right conditions, with the right advertising, somebody will snap this up, okay? And if you give strength to that today, the case will be even stronger. The case is to reject this on policy Dev 14, okay? The proposal falls below the required levels of outdoor space, okay, quite clearly, and I think the report is stretching things to throw in that they can just go to Beaumont Park. We've got to be real about the situation on individual circumstances, and to say there's a reservoir opposite, we know the conditions people live in. You know how passionate I am about this. We saw through COVID how vital outdoor space is for mental health for people that live in crowded cities, and this does not meet the requirements. Why would we approve it when there'd be so much that can be done to make that actually hit the standards? But it's not. And we want the best living conditions for people in Plymouth. And if it's not right, we refuse it. I don't believe the side gate entrance situation is appropriate. We should be taking our time on applications and getting things right. And that side gate is not the sort of thing that should be in that community. It's not safe People need to be, safe in the community on North Hill. And side gates, when there's perfectly good entrances, should be utilised. You can refuse this on Dev 14 because it is a commercial business space. And you today can make that happen. Or you can convert it, or you can say it can be converted into flats. The choice is yours. You can also refuse it on Dev 10, which is the outdoor amenity space issue. And you can also throw in Dev 18, as you did on the previous application, if you wish. All the tools are there at your disposal to make North Hill a vibrant place where it's not just flats, it's everything else. It's employment, business space, and things for leisure and all the rest of it, okay? I urge you to refuse this application for the best of Drake Ward and the local people. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Steve. And our final speaker today is Mr. Atkins. You're welcome, sir. Again, 5 minutes is yours. Would you like to be told when one is left? Okay.
Just before I start, can I just make it clear, because I think Councillor McCarthy missed the slot earlier. We know each other, we're neighbours.
I'm sure Councillor McCarthy was on the verge of catching my eye to register that interest, wasn't he? In that case, I think you better, if it's a voting issue, I think it's best to say leave the active committee area. But thanks for letting us know. Thanks, Josh. Okay, I don't think that the clock had started, Mr. Atkins, so whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I'm Dan Atkins from Crayon Architects, and we're agents for the application. And on this one, I'm in the unusual position of speaking in favour of a scheme that the applicants don't particularly want. What they would really like is to find an occupier for their ground floor office unit, which has been vacant for 1.5 years. And marketing commenced with a reputable firm with a signboard as well, I should perhaps add, before the previous tenants, a student lettings firm, departed. The proposed rent has been reduced on 2 occasions, and it's now less than the owners were achieving 15 years ago. They've realised with heavy hearts that the office use is just not viable. They find themselves between a rock and a hard place, even if granted the conversion costs, thermal upgrades, new kitchen, structural works, heating systems, etc., means that they're still not going to break even for many years. But it remains a much better scenario than having an empty office unit when housing is so urgently needed. The unoccupied ground floor currently presents security issues, encourages graffiti, antisocial behaviour, none of which is good for the area, and certainly not a destination of choice. Incidentally, the owners have been in possession of this property for many years, and the viability of an office use has been worrying them for some time. The building was a very visible and convenient place for a lettings agent, as potential tenants could come in and review what was on offer. However, agents tend to deal with much of their business online now, and many of the staff members have been working from home since the pandemic. The existing office has a very tidy fitted kitchen, new floor finishes, new heating, new toilets, broadband and data points, all tastefully decorated in a modern style. The owners originally approached us to see if we could suggest any upgrades to improve its appeal as an office, and we struggled to find any. Unlike the terrace properties further down North Hill with shop fronts and fascias for signage, Queenan Terrace essentially still looks like a row of large domestic dwellings. The upper floors of number 24 were converted to residential accommodation in 2005. It was built circa 1850 as a residential townhouse. So it's only actually had an office use for about 10% of its lifespan. It would be in keeping with the flats in the area, and I personally think that removing the commercial signage will improve the visual amenity. Of the 12 properties on the terrace, 10 of them solely offer residential accommodation, and furthermore, the remaining 2 residential uses have residential uses on the upper floors. The full residential use is how they were originally conceived. It's what they lend themselves to, and it's the best way to preserve them in the future. As across much of the town centre, an Article 4 direction applies to the site, but this does not prohibit changing the use. It just means that planning permission is required so the local authority can rightly assess each application on its merits. We're proposing 2 self-contained flats that will be bright and inviting, central location, they comply with the JLP. We've proposed a layout that the planning officer is recommending for approval. And the change of use will also trigger certain building regulations upgrades to the thermal fabric, so the building will have an improved energy performance rating. And this, along with the enabling works for an electric car charging point, must also be considered beneficial in the context of the climate emergency. Working habits have changed. They've been changing for some time. Thank you. Rightmove shows Plymouth currently has 38 offices to rent of a similar size, and many of these adverts have been live for more than 6 months. With the minimum wage and employers' NIC set to rise next April, businesses are going to find having to go to even greater length to avoid the overheads that come with running an office space. And the planning system really must support investment in these older buildings to make them fit for purpose in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Atkins, thank you so much. It's now open to the committee, and Paul was first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit concerned about that utility room in flat B that's not allowed to be a bedroom, because surely in a few years' time it'll end up being a bedroom and we'll have a small overcrowded flat on North Hill.
Thank you. Yes, so officers did have concerns with the utility room and considered that it would be undersized to provide a bedroom or could potentially lead to too many occupants within the flat. And so officers have recommended a condition that only the rooms that are labelled as bedrooms on the proposed plans can be used as bedrooms. If they wanted to use another room as a bedroom, then they would need to apply for planning permission for that. I suppose if we were ever, notified that bedrooms were being occupied that weren't labelled on the plans, then that would be a case for our enforcement team to look into.
Okay, Paul? Yeah. Who's next? Maddie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always in 2 minds about this because obviously my independent colleague brings these to Planning Commission. But obviously, I used to be a business advisor, and the fact that that property's been vacant for 18 months, as our second speaker, I'm sorry, I do apologise, I've forgotten your name, clearly mentioned.
Mr. Atkins.
Mr. Atkins, thank you. I just think, now since COVID, we all have the ability to work from home if we can. Obviously, nurses can't, but, office staff can. So it is a redundant space. It's been redundant for quite a while. The second lot of plans you showed are much more tasteful than the first lot. I did not like the fact that there was a wall going straight through the middle of the window, so it made sense to make bedroom 1 bigger and bedroom 2. My question, though, Chair, is who would get the parking space? I'm assuming that the actual developer will rent these properties out to gain some income back from the lost revenue from the past 18 months, but who would actually use that parking space? Would it be apartment B, or I just wondered, that was just a question. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, so within the design and access statement, it was set out that the parking space would be allocated to flat B.
That's the only question I had, really. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Maddie. Who's next? Anne.
My turn again. Sorry. Okay, so whilst I understand that the owners of the property may have difficulty in renting out their office accommodation, and I also understand
There is a need for additional housing in the city, but I have real concerns with this. With the previous application, we talked about Dev 10 with the lack of outdoor amenity space. And then we have this one, which is screaming at us for flat A, no amenity space. Because of that lack of outdoor space, I have concerns with this. I have concerns with how we appear through our policies or procedures, whatever, how we appear to be allowing people's accommodation to become smaller and smaller and smaller and say that it's actually perfectly okay. You can live in that tiny, tight space. So again, this is actually aimed at flat B when you look at what is being crammed into that first main room. But overall, Dev 10, the lack of outdoor space.
So yes, that application was assessed against policy Dev 10, which looks into providing adequate occupant amenity. Both flat A and flat B are considered to comply with the nationally described space standards. That sets out the minimum internal floor space for properties. In terms of the outdoor amenity space, so yes, flat B would have a private outdoor amenity space measuring approximately 20 square metres, and there wouldn't be any on-site amenity space for flat A. Within the officer report, it did outline that Drake's Place is just over the road, so about a 1-minute walk away, and Beaumont Park is about a 10-minute walk away. Within this area of the city, it's characteristic of properties to be served by relatively small private amenity spaces, particularly where properties have been converted into flats. And so for that reason, and considering the proximity to public amenity space, officers did not consider this to be a reason for the refusal of the application.
Thank you for that. But there's always a but. When we are encouraging accommodations such as this, so flat A will have no access to amenity space within the property boundaries. So we are then potentially telling people, that's okay, you're going to dry your washing indoors. We're going to start encouraging condensation, damp, mold, because we're not allowing processes, procedures, national, local, whichever, to actually allow people to have those facilities and amenities. And saying to people like, oh, you got Drake's Place across the road and so on, that's if Drake's Place is still opened and maintained. It was no access for a number of years, not all that many years ago, and it was not really a go-to area. And actually, not everybody has the ability, the physical ability to access these other places.
Well, the whole point, I think, is a range of housing, and no one will be forced to live here if it goes ahead. It's about having the options. And so this might suit some people, might not suit other people. But I think it's about having that choice, which is key. And Jeremy has indicated next.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is another case where it requires a change of use. This has been brought up by both of the speakers today. Have the planning officers analysed the availability of similar business, vacant business properties in the area, such that we retain that flexibility of use within the area?
So officers have not looked into, other office spaces within the surrounding area. What officers have done in order to establish the principle of development is assess the application against Dev 14. And Dev 14 provides protection for existing employment sites, including those where the lawful use is for employment purposes. In respect to this site in particular, Dev 14.1 paragraph 3 requires that there is no reasonable prospect of the site to be used for employment use in the future, and then in the supplementary planning document, paragraphs 5.11 to 5.13 set out that a proportionate proportionate marketing material should be submitted as part of the application. During the course of the application, the council's economic development officer did request that marketing information, which was submitted by the applicant, and the economic development team were then reconsulted on the new information received and were satisfied that that met the policy requirements of DEV 14.
Thanks. Alison.
I'm going to disagree with my colleague on the utility space issue. Having lived for many years in a small flat on the 5th floor with a very, very small balcony, that actually wasn't an issue because I had opposite me, literally opposite, in very similar circumstances to this one, a green, pleasant area that we could go and walk in. So I don't think the loss of utility is a game breaker on this one, for me personally. It was originally a large residential house. It would have had a big family. It would have had a staff involved in that house. So it's almost reverting back to probably the same number of people living in the property that were in it in 1851 when the census was taken. It's just a view.
Thanks, Alison. Any more? Paul? And then we'll probably look to reach some form of conclusion. Paul?
Can I ask about this vertical bike shelter for 10 bicycles? Is that in place because there's not enough room to park them in a normal way? Is this a modern way of parking bicycles, which I've yet to hear about?
Yeah, so the bike store, which has been proposed within the rear yard area, would be, it's been proposed in the design and access statement that would be the vertical storage of bicycles. The local highway authority have reviewed that and consider that to be acceptable.
Yeah, but what exactly is it? I don't understand how it would work.
So my understanding of that is that instead of just kind of pushing the bike in, it kind of is pulled up and slotted in vertically, if that makes sense. Sorry.
I'd have thought with all your cycling you do every day, Paul, you'd have seen this, but obviously not. Go on, Jeremy.
Just a small bit.
Jeremy's going to explain the vertical cycling to us.
That is quite normal and probably one of the most default ways of doing cycle storage now in new developments, because you can fit a lot more bicycles in a smaller space. You just hang them up.
We'll be asking questions next time on that one. Anybody else? Okay, well, it's quite unusual, quite unusual to have a city centre dwelling of this age that escaped the Blitz. And it's not just this one, there are a number of terraces up and down North Hill. And a lot of my thinking is that it's really good to go back to the original use. And Alison spoke about the number of people who would have no doubt inhabited the building when it was a single family home, including servants, no doubt. But this is what city centre living is all about. And I appreciate Anne's concerns, but it's about having a mix. And if city centre living is what you want, with that compact nature and perhaps less amenity space, this will attract you. If it's amenity space that you're after, that's your selling point, you might have a growing family or whatever, this isn't going to be for you. But that's for individual house hunters to look for. And rather than have another empty office space, for my mind, going back to the original use of the building for people to live close to the city centre, I think is a really good one. It makes sense to me. So I'm happy to support the recommendation, which is to grant conditionally. And if we could open the voting, please. Yes, point of order from Matt.
Whether this is a point of order, I don't know. Given that on the last application, we were advised to defer with a mind to rejecting, given that, again, with this, we haven't had a chance to review those new policy frameworks, should it not be the case that we're being asked to vote on this with a mind to either approving or rejecting, and then coming back at a later date?
Right, can we cancel the voting just for a second before we round this off? And I'll ask Stuart to come in just on that.
Yes, and it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, and the committee would be, well within their rights to defer the decision to, pending a full consideration of the 5-year supply. I mean, what we know from the consultation draft that we received and the calculations we did on the 5-year supply is that our demand for housing will increase. The MPPF that we've seen and analysed to date indicates that increase is true. So what we need to now work out is what increased demand. I just can't put a figure on it today, but there's certainly no less demand for housing. So I think in terms of moving to grant the permission, the risk of it being out of consistency with the MPPF is much lower.
I'm sure the reason for deferring in the last decision is because it was our decision to reject. In this case, if our decision is to accept the offer, the planning consideration, then I suspect that becomes moot. So can I recommend that if the decision is to reject, then we defer, but if it is to accept, then we go forward, because it's unlikely, if we accept the decision, that the applicant is not going to appeal the decision.
Thank you, Chair. Could the last applicant not object if we didn't deal with this in the same way as the previous one?
No, all are dealt with on their own merits. I'm satisfied that the debate has been conducted fairly and reasonably. I think we've had open answers to open questions, so I'm not sure that, well, put it this way, were we to refuse, of course the applicant would always be able to appeal. And then if we did look to refuse, obviously we'd get advice from our officers, like with the last one, depending on what the reasons were. Matt, you wanted to come back on this one?
Yeah, I think, Stuart has allayed any concerns about whether or not we should be treating this the same as the last one. As he says, if anything, we're only going to increase our number of housing provisions. So I think, just go forward as normal seems fine.
Okay, so the recommendation is to, thanks for that everybody, the recommendation is to grant conditionally. If we could go back to the vote, I'd be grateful, and then we'll see where we are. That's everybody who's present, so I'll declare that carried. Thanks very much. And before anyone asks afterwards, I wasn't on the planning committee when these were first built in 1851, despite what some people might have you believe. Item number 7 is the list of application decisions. Is there anything on there anyone wants to raise? No, we'll note those. I don't think we have any appeal decisions to go through this time, which I'll take as a positive. And I don't think we have any exempt business. So that only remains for me to wish everyone a very happy festive period, and try not to think about planning issues too much over the turkey and the cranberry sauce. But have a good one, and see you all in the new year.